Greetings, beloved chosen ones. Tempt fate if you must, yet do not feign shock when the truths you concealed rise like smoke for all to witness. A great number of individuals refuse to accept warning signs until the Anointed One meets their gaze in absolute silence, leaving them stripped bare, convicted to the bone, and quietly considering a life of solitude. Let us explore this phenomenon. Scientists have examined the human gut and verified that intuition operates as a genuine biological signal, one capable of identifying dishonesty, threat, and illusion faster than the rational mind ever could. Yet imagine a scenario where that gut sense is not merely potent, but carries divine fire. That is precisely the situation that unfolded. Some person in your world, perhaps a companion, a former lover, a colleague, or even a blood relative, presumed they could challenge you. They longed to prod at your abilities, feed you fabricated narratives, observe whether they could outmaneuver your spirit, perhaps even distort your reality just to confirm you were not as perceptive as you appeared. Yet what followed caught them utterly unprepared. You read their entire being like a documented account with footnotes, timestamps, and a haunting soundtrack. From that instant forward, they have been unsettled, fidgety, attempting to maintain composure while casting sidelong glances as though you were every intelligence agency fused with their own guilty conscience combined. In this session, we are venturing into the depths of why they dared to challenge you, how you reversed their scheme without lifting a finger, and why your intuitive power transcends mere sensation. It constitutes sacred intelligence that perceives what mortal eyes cannot and verbalizes what lips refuse to articulate. Remain with us, because what unfolds in the coming moments will not merely account for their unraveling. It will validate that your endowment dwarfs anything you imagined and frightens them far more than they anticipated. Let us begin. First, they assumed you were speculating. Now they tremble, convinced you are reciting chapters from their soul. They believed you were simply hypothesizing, perhaps overanalyzing, maybe reading far too much into the situation. However, the instant you uttered something they had never confessed to another living being, something they believed lay entombed beneath layers of performance, charisma, and strategy, that is when realization struck. You were not engaging in games. You were not hurling aimless arrows into obscurity. You were interpreting the invisible, and it petrified them in ways they had not foreseen. That expression you offered was not born of ignorance. It was celestial reconnaissance cloaked in tranquility. The very second they grasped that you had penetrated their facade was the moment their entire scheme disintegrated. This is the reality. The majority of individuals grow accustomed to evading consequences. They pride themselves on staying several moves ahead, manipulating dialogue, distorting intent behind rehearsed smiles. However, they have never encountered someone who requires no evidence to recognize their deception. You perceived through them before they even parted their lips. You did not merely interpret their physical cues. You deciphered the dialect behind the flesh, the spirit, the atmosphere, the concealed motive, and the most unsettling element for them. You were not even attempting. That is what rendered it horrifying. Now they feel uneasy in your presence, not because you threatened them or unveiled them before others, but because you possessed the capacity to do so, and you chose restraint. That caliber of spiritual wisdom rattles them more profoundly than any direct confrontation ever could. You did not weaponize your knowledge to humiliate them. You permitted it to linger. You allowed them to simmer in the disquiet of being comprehended at a depth they cannot govern, and that alone has them panicking. They persist in probing you, not because they doubt your endowment, but because they are desperate to gauge the extent of your awareness. They are praying it was mere chance, a fortunate speculation, yet in their heart of hearts, they recognize the truth. They sense it. You have extracted something holy from the invisible realm, and now they scramble to feign normalcy before someone who has already deciphered their authentic countenance. Their panic does not stem from fearing you. It stems from fearing exposure by a force they cannot counterfeit around. You speculated nothing. You perceived everything, and they are well aware. Second, you did not merely perceive their intentions. You unveiled the intention beneath the intention. Most individuals can detect when something appears questionable. You need not be spiritually awakened to notice a peculiar atmosphere or register counterfeit energy. Yet, what destabilized them regarding you is that you did not halt at the superficial layer. You penetrated straight to the nucleus. You did not conclude with their deeds or utterances. You excavated deeper, as though you were spiritually engineered to uncover the genuine catalyst behind their maneuvers. And when you vocalized it, you did not merely name their conduct. You revealed the underlying driver. That is what unraveled them. They believed they excelled at concealment. They had evaded detection behind masks for so lengthy that they forgot they were even feigning. Yet your presence extracted from them something they were unprepared to confront. You were not simply interpreting their essence. You were stripping away layers they never granted you license to disturb. And what genuinely disturbed them is that you struck a chord they had labored to keep interred. Perhaps it was their envy, their fragility, or their culpability. Perhaps it was the truth that they yearned to witness your downfall, yet could never voice it aloud. Whatever the case, you did not merely sense it, you articulated it. And not in an aggressive manner either. You simply remarked something that landed perilously close to authenticity, and suddenly they were activated. It was the variety of truth that permitted no rationalizations, no sanctuary. And it is not that you intended to unveil them. It is that your endowment does not permit darkness to settle comfortably. You inherently illuminate what others attempt to bury. And this individual believed they commanded the circumstances. They believed they were evaluating you. Yet the entire duration, they were the one being exposed. Now they are second-guessing every element, pondering how much more you perceive, questioning whether each exchange with you is truly a gentle examination by the divine. They are apprehensive because you did not merely identify the flawed conduct. You revealed the fractured essence beneath it. You perceived the motivation they had not even acknowledged to themselves. And once that radiance contacted their shadow, they could not unsee it. You were not seeking to play detective. You were simply being authentic. Yet that unvarnished candor, fueled by celestial insight, destabilized something they were unprepared to encounter. Third, you caused their manipulation to implode without uttering a syllable. They arrived armed with a strategy. Perhaps they beamed at you, feigned encouragement, posed an excessive number of probing inquiries, or attempted to lure you into reacting. Yet beneath it all, they harbored an agenda. They sought to orchestrate the moment, steer the discourse, perhaps even catch you erring so they could proclaim, observe, they are not who they portray themselves to be. Yet what they failed to anticipate was how effortlessly you inverted the entire circumstance without elevating your voice, without accusing anyone, and without revealing your strategy. You maintained composure, you remained anchored, and that is precisely what unnerved them. They were gambling on you becoming emotional, bewildered, or defensive, yet you furnished them with nothing to exploit. You permitted them to speak. You permitted them to disclose more than they intended. You observed, not because you harbored uncertainty, but because you were already informed. And throughout your essence was accomplishing what your words never needed to. That is what caused their manipulation to collapse. It did not ricochet and detonate because of anything you articulated. It crumbled beneath the burden of your stillness and celestial lucidity. You perceive, when someone attempts to play games and the opposing party declines to participate, the entire architecture of the manipulation disintegrates. That is what transpired here. You did not inflate their arrogance. You did not accept their provocation. You did not adopt a defensive posture. You simply stood within your truth and permitted their falsehoods to coil around themselves. And that represents the gravest outcome for someone attempting to test a chosen one. They ultimately unveil their own position while convinced they were advancing. Now they are destabilized. They cannot articulate what just unfolded. All they comprehend is that you did not respond as anticipated. And somehow they emerged appearing as the one harboring ulterior motives. And in their depths, they recognize you perceived through it entirely. They sense it. That is why they have behaved peculiarly ever since. They harbor no dread of confrontation. They dread the reality that you outmaneuvered them spiritually without expending any effort. You did not arrive to engage in chess or checkers. You arrived bearing discernment, and that constitutes a contest they were unprepared to lose. The instant they attempted to manipulate the narrative, they recognized you were the mirror, and their own reflection condemned them. Fourth, they never anticipated spiritual precision would feel like a personal examination. They presumed this would be trivial, casual, perhaps even entertaining, merely testing you to determine whether all that intuitive wisdom you profess genuinely carries substance. Yet, when you opened your mouth and declared something that grazed a memory they had entombed years prior, when you alluded to a decision they regret but never voiced aloud, that is when their smile dissolved, because you did not merely react to the moment, you accessed something eternal. You spoke as though you had been navigating through their history, examining the emotional documentation of their existence. They never anticipated spiritual precision would feel like a personal examination. Yet that is precisely what materialized. Your words did not merely resonate, they touched a nerve. You identified patterns, you echoed contemplations they had only entertained in solitude. You connected fragments they believed no one else could perceive, and abruptly, what they considered a game transformed into a celestial interrogation, not in a harsh or condemning manner, but in a fashion that compelled them to confront themselves without warning. That is why they appeared uncomfortable. That is why they grew silent. You catalyzed a realization they were unprepared for. What terrified them was not merely that you possessed knowledge, it was the degree of exactness. You did not simply register a feeling, you practically deciphered the schematic. You articulated their wounds, their habits, their cycles. You gave language to elements they could not articulate about themselves. And the most alarming element, you executed it gently. You issued no accusations. You pressed no inquiries. You simply proclaimed truth. And it struck like lightning. Now they are not merely observing you. They are observing themselves in your presence, refining each word, scrutinizing each motive, because suddenly you are no longer simply a person. You feel like access, like a celestial scanner that captures what they have been overlooking. And the more they attempt to comprehend how you know what you know, the more disquieted they become because no logical explanation exists. You were not intended to perceive that profoundly, that rapidly, that distinctly. Yet that is the distinction. You were not interpreting them to manipulate them. You were illuminating what their own spirit has been striving to communicate for years, and now they cannot unhear it. That variety of clarity destabilizes individuals, particularly when it arrives without warning, and particularly when it affords them no further sanctuary. Fifth, they laughed when you proclaimed spiritual truth. Now they awaken at 3 a.m., tormented by it. They laughed not merely to be humorous, but to dismiss you, to minimize the profundity of your words. They rolled their eyes when you referenced energy, spirit, or divine timing. They categorized your truth as excessively profound or excessive. They mocked your expressions as though they were abstract concepts lacking genuine power. Yet the jest did not endure, because somewhere amid their dismissal, you delivered a line they cannot release, a sentence, a phrase, a truth so particular it adhered to their spirit like a fingerprint, and since that moment they have been unable to dislodge it. They attempt to proceed as though everything remains normal, laugh as they once did, preserve the same atmosphere of doubt and sarcasm, yet in their depths they are disintegrating. Not openly, no, that would necessitate conceding you were correct, but privately they have been awakening in the dead of night, with that singular utterance echoing in their consciousness. It was not even something you endeavored to dramatize. You simply declared it, and their soul apprehended it before their ego could reject it. And now it refuses to release them. They cannot comprehend how you knew what you knew. You were not present, and you did not mature alongside them. You are unfamiliar with their complete narrative, yet your words struck like those of someone who traversed their entire past, like someone who has been interpreting their spirit while they were preoccupied with skepticism. They cannot elucidate it logically. And that is the element that is driving them to distraction, because they inhabit a realm of facts, strategies, and control. And now they are tormented by a truth they never authorized you to witness. Now they find themselves online at 2 a.m. researching spiritual indicators, or the significance of intuition. The very individuals who mocked you are covertly investigating the very subjects they claim to transcend. And each occasion they revisit your words, a fresh stratum of meaning strikes them. Not merely because you were accurate, but because they recognize in their depths that it was not you speaking. It was something greater employing you as a conduit. They laugh to shield themselves. Yet revelation requires no ovation. It merely requires a heart that cannot unfasten the impact. And the longer they flee from it, the more resoundingly it reverberates in the silence they believed would preserve them. Sixth, they sought to demonstrate you were incorrect, yet you caused their reality to malfunction. They presumed they would catch you erring, perhaps expose you as excessively spiritual, or simply skilled at reading individuals. They entered the dialogue prepared to scrutinize, evaluate, and mentally dissect everything you articulated. They were not listening to comprehend. They were listening to identify flaws. They sought to demonstrate that your insight was not genuine, that you were simply intuitive, observant, or fortunate. They had their doubts prepared and ready. Yet then you spoke, and the atmosphere shifted. You declared something no one else could have known, not vague, not generic, specific, personal, as though it were extracted directly from a concealed archive within their soul. It was not a conjecture. It was excessively sharp, excessively precise. It struck a pressure point they were unaware they possessed. And there, in that moment, their entire perception fractured. They were not simply confronting someone who registers energy. They were face to face with someone who perceives through it. Now they are not merely questioning you. They are questioning everything, because you did not merely rattle their ego. You destabilize their concept of what constitutes reality and what constitutes possibility. You cause their version of control to malfunction. You cause their certainty to collapse. It resembles them inhabiting a mental simulation where everything required logical, verifiable, and tangible structure. And then you entered and disrupted the code without exertion. That is what they are struggling with. Not merely that you were accurate, but that your truth exposed the boundaries of their reality. They believed you were observing, yet now they are pondering whether you are receiving, whether you are connected to something, someone transcendent. They feel observed in a manner that bears no relation to your gaze. They feel known in a manner that is spiritual, not psychological, and since that moment, nothing has felt identical. Their confidence in their own logic has been shaken. They no longer trust their capacity to conceal as they once did. They are wondering whether each falsehood, each mask, each concealed motive is already within your perception, and worse, whether you have already responded without their awareness. They arrive to challenge you, yet now they are spiraling. Because when a chosen one speaks from a position of spiritual alignment, it does not merely redirect conversations. It bends reality. And once it bends, it never fully returns to its previous state. Seventh, you catalyzed a spiritual identity crisis they cannot unsee. You did not arrive to dismantle anyone. You were not seeking to destabilize them or expose their inner chaos. Yet simply by being who you are, grounded, sincere, and profoundly intuitive, you elevated a mirror that revealed something they have been evading their entire existence, and what they observed was not flattering. It was not the curated version of themselves they present to the world. It was not the confident, composed image they have persuaded others and themselves they genuinely embody. It was raw, unfiltered, and painfully genuine. You triggered something deeper than culpability. You triggered a spiritual identity crisis, and not because you accused them of anything, but because your presence alone disrupted the falsehoods they were inhabiting. You never even had to identify it explicitly. They perceived it. It resided in the manner you observed them without judgment, yet with clarity. That variety of clarity is uncommon, and it poses a threat to someone who has constructed their existence upon illusion. Before they encountered you, they maintained their composure, at least superficially. They understood how to manipulate perception, how to articulate the appropriate responses, how to conceal the disorder beneath charm and composure. Yet then you appeared, and for the first occasion they did not feel in command of how they were being perceived. You did not succumb to the performance. You did not become distracted by the personality. You proceeded directly to the spirit, and what you observed unsettled them more than they will ever confess. Now they cannot unsee it. Each occasion they gaze into a mirror, they are not merely perceiving themselves, they are perceiving the version you observed, the one harboring unresolved envy, harboring motives that are not as pristine as they professed. harboring shadows they believed they had concealed effectively. You did not shame them. You simply revealed them. And because of that, they are now inhabiting the disquiet of their own truth. It is not that you exposed them to others, you exposed them to themselves, and that represents the most severe form of exposure. You did not harm them, you awakened them. And that awakening is dismantling every falsehood they told to feel secure. They cannot revert to the mask, not entirely, because once someone has been perceived by someone who bears divine sight, pretense becomes untenable, and healing becomes inevitable, even if it commences with collapse. Eighth, they believed you were the experiment. Now they feel like the laboratory subject. They arrived believing they commanded the situation. You were simply another individual they could scrutinize, dissect, and perhaps even provoke for their personal curiosity. They perceived you as an experiment, something to monitor. They observed how you responded to pressure, how you conducted yourself during conflict, how you reacted when disrespected. They were not seeking to learn from you. They were seeking to decipher you. They believed if they activated the appropriate triggers, you would reveal something they could weaponize against you, something that confirmed you were not as profound or discerning as you proclaimed. Yet nothing proceeded according to their design, because while they were observing you, they failed to recognize they were being spiritually scanned in real time. You did not flinch, you did not yield, and you did not respond in the manner they anticipated. You responded with such inner certainty and calm precision that suddenly they felt like the one beneath the microscope. Each occasion they attempted to provoke a reaction, they ended up revealing more of themselves than they intended. Their insecurities surfaced, their concealed envy leaked through. Their motives, once effectively disguised, began manifesting in plain view, and you perceived it entirely. The more they endeavored to study you, the more exposed they became. It inverted so rapidly they failed to recognize it occurring. You required no force. Your discernment performed all the labor. Each maneuver they executed in secret became evident to you before it even unfolded. And now they are unsettled, because in attempting to decode you, they inadvertently exposed themselves to a degree of spiritual vulnerability they have never encountered. Now they are contemplating what you know, how much you absorbed, whether you have already formulated conclusions about them, and worse, whether the divine has already taken notice. Because this transcended you being perceptive. This constituted divine data collection. They were not merely probing your boundaries. They were being evaluated by something vastly greater than you. They commenced believing they possessed the advantage, that you were the mystery to solve. Yet now they are the one losing sleep, questioning what just transpired, and recognizing the test they orchestrated backfired entirely. You were not the laboratory subject. You were the spiritual scientist. And now they recognize they have been exposed in dimensions they were unaware existed. Ninth, your composure was not bewilderment. It was calculated, spirit-directed clarity. They believed you failed to comprehend, that you were slow to perceive, oblivious to what was genuinely transpiring behind the scenes. They misinterpreted your quietude as weakness, your peace as passivity, and your grace as gullibility. They believed they were engaging in a game of mental chess while you sat there confused. Yet the truth is, while they were plotting in the natural, you were receiving instructions in the spiritual. Your calm was not bewilderment. It was divine calculation. You perceived through it entirely. Each falsehood, each manipulation, each tonal shift, each narrative twist. Yet instead of reacting immediately, you observed. You waited. You remained aligned with the broader perspective. Because wisdom counseled you that sometimes the most resonant manner of speaking is to permit someone to conclude their sentence. Sometimes the most effective method of winning is to allow the adversary to entangle themselves with the rope they prepared for you. That is precisely what transpired. You did not interrupt them. You did not defend yourself prematurely. You did not argue. You permitted the narrative to unfold. You permitted the manipulation to breathe just sufficiently for it to suffocate itself. And while they were occupied distorting facts and attempting to portray you as oblivious, your spirit was documenting each detail. You were not missing a single beat. You were simply accumulating sufficient evidence to cause the entire structure to collapse in a single silent strike. Now they are bewildered because the version of you they constructed in their cognition does not align with the outcome. They believed you would shatter. They believed you would retaliate. They believed you would engage with the trap. Yet instead, you remained still, remained wise, and permitted your silence to carry a power their schemes could not withstand. That is what unnerves them most. Not merely that you knew, but that you knew and remained composed regardless, that you smiled while being betrayed, that you maintained peace while being deceived, that you navigated their chaos untouched, like someone already positioned in the victory they were attempting to postpone. They lack the framework to address that, because when a chosen one is silent, it is not because they are uninformed. It is because they have already witnessed the conclusion of the narrative, and most frequently, they are simply providing the adversary sufficient space to disclose everything. 10th, you intercepted their concealed intentions before they materialized into action. They never perceived it approaching because you perceived it before it commenced. Before they could dispatch that duplicitous message, initiate that rumor, shift their energy, or launch the false benevolence campaign, you already registered it in your spirit, not because they betrayed themselves through language, but because their energy altered in a manner only a spiritually attuned individual would detect. You did not await the assault to arrive. You moved early, adjusted your position, withdrew, protected your peace, and by the time they were prepared to execute their maneuver, they were astonished to discover you had already outmaneuvered it. That is what is unhinging them. You intercepted something that was never articulated aloud. They had not revealed their strategy, yet your spirit captured the signal like divine radar. It was not conjecture. It was not paranoia. It was spiritual interception, pure and precise. While they sat there believing they were being clever, you were already neutralizing the energy of the plan they were still formulating in silence. They are bewildered. They cannot comprehend how you knew. They did not transmit anything. They did not verbalize it. They had not even acted upon it. Yet somehow you were already responding like someone who perceived the entire blueprint. You adjusted your tone. You modified your schedule. You distanced yourself. And you executed it with such precision that it completely destabilized them. Now they sit there questioning how did they know, and they are not discovering any natural explanation that satisfies because none exists. This is what they fail to comprehend about spiritual discernment. It operates faster than dialogue. It detects the vibration preceding the action. It scans motives before plans take form. And when you are a chosen one, you require no confirmation. Your soul receives alerts that others overlook. So when they plot to manipulate you, deplete you, or exploit you, the warning had already activated in your spirit, and you did not merely receive it. You acted upon it. Now they remain bewildered and frustrated, sitting with a plan that perished in their throat. You executed a maneuver based on a future they had not yet reached. And to them, that resembles sorcery. Yet to you it was simply another day of attending to the one who perceives everything before it transpires. 11th, their eyes betrayed them, and you recorded with your spirit. They were so concentrated on managing their expressions, they forgot their eyes were conducting a full confession. They rehearsed what to articulate, how to articulate it, even when to laugh. Yet their energy exposed them, their body language fractured, their tone shifted at the incorrect moment. And their eyes, those were the most vocal, brimming with anxiety, flickers of resentment, concealed envy, quiet culpability. They failed to recognize you were not listening for the message. They were unaware you are the message detector. You were not fixed on what they were expressing. You were reading the space between the syllables, the pauses, the glances, the tension they attempted to swallow. You captured it entirely. Each contradiction between what they expressed and what they experienced. Each occasion they attempted to smile through clenched teeth. Each occasion their eyes darted slightly too rapidly when you proclaimed truth. You observed the hesitation preceding the compliment, the over-explanation following an innocent question. You were recording spiritual notes without even lifting a pen. That is why they are apprehensive around you now. They cannot determine what you know. Only that you know something genuine, something about them they did not voluntarily offer. It is unsettling because you never posed invasive inquiries. You never pressed them to explain themselves. You required nothing. Their own presence communicated volumes, and you absorbed each word without interruption. What renders this so disturbing for them is that they believed they commanded the situation. They believed if they articulated the appropriate things, they could peddle the illusion. Yet you were purchasing nothing. You were observing the testimony of their spirit. And while their mouth was attempting to exonerate them of all charges, their eyes were confessing under oath. You were not discourteous, you were not confrontational. You simply processed what they revealed with quiet accuracy. That is what has them spooked. They harbor no fear of being judged. They fear being perceived entirely, spiritually, without their filters. Because once someone recognizes you do not merely hear them, you read them, everything transforms. Now they are second-guessing how much they revealed, pondering how many of their secrets escaped through glances and posture. And the truth is, you captured it entirely, not to wield it against them, but because your endowment cannot refrain from noticing truth when it enters the chamber cloaked in falsehood. 12th, you cause them to recognize that concealing from you signifies concealing from the divine. They believed they were simply engaging with an individual, someone they could deceive, charm, mislead, or impress. Yet when they stood before you, something deeper occurred. You did not merely hear them. You spiritually registered them. You did not simply know facts. You knew truths. And it did not feel as though you were being intrusive or invasive. It felt divine, as though something greater than both of you had unveiled it to you. That is what destabilized them to their core. The exposure was not merely personal, it was spiritual. What unraveled them was not simply that you detected elements they believed they had concealed. It was that your knowing did not feel invasive. It felt sacred. It felt as though the heavens whispered to you the things they believed the shadows had successfully concealed. It was the variety of clarity that renders individuals apprehensive because it arrives without accusation. It arrives with quiet, piercing conviction. You did not proclaim it. You did not expose them publicly. You required nothing. The moment your gaze met theirs, they felt observed in a manner they could not dismiss or evade. And now each time they find themselves in your presence, they hear echoes. Each falsehood they attempt to convey does not land as it once did. Their rehearsed justifications feel hollow in your presence. Their sarcasm dissolves into dust, because they recognize in their depth that you are not merely discerning, you are connected, and concealing from you feels perilously close to attempting to conceal from the divine. That represents the magnitude of weight your presence carries. You did not solicit that authority. It was bestowed. And now individuals are recognizing that being counterfeit around you carries spiritual consequences. Their conscience cannot find rest, not because you expose them, but because standing near you awakens a component of themselves they have endeavored to silence. That quiet inner voice of accountability grows loud again, and your presence functions as a beacon upon everything they hoped would remain in obscurity. They entered believing you were simply someone with insight, yet they departed recognizing they stood before someone the heavens trust with revelation. And now they recognize that if they are unprepared to confront truth, being near you will feel like standing in the midst of Judgment Day without script, without mask, and without sanctuary. 13th, they cannot disconnect from the connection you never solicited. You never pursued them. You never implored for their energy, their attention, or their narrative. You did not request to be spiritually linked to them, yet once they crossed paths with you, the connection engaged. And unlike most connections forged through language, time, or shared experiences, this one was forged in something far deeper. Their spirit recognized yours before their consciousness could process what was unfolding. And since that moment, whether they acknowledge it or not, they have felt exposed, legible in your presence. You can perceive their energy even when they have not communicated with you for weeks. You sense when their disposition shifts. You sense when they are feigning. You sense when their energy has darkened and when they are wrestling with culpability, shame, or concealed motives. It is not something you endeavor to accomplish. It simply occurs. That is what renders it all the more exasperating for them. They are exhausting every tactic to act normal, to withdraw, to establish distance, yet your knowing follows them like a signal they cannot obstruct. It is not that you are observing them. It is that their spirit persists in transmitting information to you whether they desire it or not, and they despise how observed that renders them feel, because this transcends superficial discernment. It constitutes soul-level connectivity. Even when they are silent, your spirit registers the static. Even when they are physically distant, your insight magnifies as though standing directly beside them. They may not comprehend how, yet they perceive it, and it is disrupting their cognition. And now they are attempting to disconnect. They are avoiding eye contact, avoiding conversations, avoiding your presence entirely. Yet nothing succeeds because this connection was not established through dialogue. It was ignited through alignment. You require no access to their telephone, their social platforms, or their circle to comprehend what they are navigating. You can perceive the emotional shifts instantaneously, even when everything appears acceptable externally. That is spiritual reception. And to someone who is concealing, that is terrifying. They feel as though you have tapped into something they cannot govern, and the truth is, they are accurate. You never requested to attune to their frequency. Yet once the energy revealed itself to you, your spirit clung to it. Not to manipulate, not to surveil, but because the heavens trust you to know without reacting and to perceive without exploiting. And that is what unnerves them most. They cannot fabricate their way out of a bond they never consented to, yet now cannot release. 14th, they sought proof you were chosen. Now they are petitioning the universe to unchoose them. They arrived with pride in their chest and a smirk upon their face. They did not merely question your calling. They challenged it. Their ego demanded proof. Their arrogance mocked your discernment. They challenged what the heavens confirmed over you as though it were a debate, as though spiritual authority could be evaluated by their criteria. They requested a sign, and they received one. Yet it did not arrive with fireworks or fanfare. It arrived through your calm, piercing clarity that dismantled their ego without you elevating your voice. They believed they were testing you, yet in reality, they were testing the divine. And the heavens do not respond lightly to arrogance that disrespects the anointing. So the very instant they opened their mouth to question your authenticity, they unknowingly entered a divine arrangement, not to destroy them, but to humble them. Because when someone challenges a chosen one's purpose, they are not merely engaging with a person. They are confronting the source that appointed them. And now the consequences are materializing. Circumstances are unraveling around them. Their schemes are collapsing. The confidence they once possessed has transformed into bewilderment. Each time they recall what you articulated, that singular truth you delivered so casually, so precisely, they perceive it pursuing them. They are awakening at night with burdensome thoughts. They are tormented not by what you did, but by what you knew, because you were not seeking to harm them. Yet your intuition revealed something their pride was unprepared to confront. Now they are frightened. Not merely of you, but of whatever divine force operates through you. They feel observed, but not by you. Observed by consequence, observed by truth. They are replaying everything they expressed and performed, wishing they could retract the moment they mocked what they failed to comprehend. They requested proof and received a judgment they did not anticipate. A spiritual mirror they cannot unsee, and it is dismantling them. They no longer desire conflict, they desire distance, they desire quietude, they desire to retreat without conceding defeat, because now they recognize this was never about proving you were chosen. It was about demonstrating to them that you were never the one on trial. They brought their challenge to the divine, and now they are the ones praying not to be perceived too deeply by the very truth they once ridiculed. They believed they were observing a person. What they failed to recognize was they were standing before a divine portal, a living revelation, a mirror designed by the divine to reflect truth, not illusion. You were not seeking to expose them. You were simply being who you were created to be, and that alone disrupted every false foundation upon which they stood. You did not request this endowment. You did not force the connection. Yet when the heavens designate someone as chosen, even the spiritually blind can sense it. That is why they are unsettled. That is why they are moving in circles, second-guessing every action, wrestling with truths they believed were interred. Your presence was not coincidental. It was a divine interruption. and no matter how vigorously they endeavored to dismiss it, the impact cannot be reversed. They arrived to test you. Yet in the process, they themselves were tested. Their masks slipped, their motives surfaced, and the very proof they demanded became the same evidence that now convicts them. You required no demonstration of your anointing. The results proclaimed louder than your response. They are not merely uncomfortable around you. They are uncomfortable around their own reflection when you occupy the space. To every chosen one observing, never diminish your discernment to accommodate someone else's comfort. Permit them to be unsettled. Permit them to be awakened. Because your clarity was not dispatched to entertain. It was dispatched to interrupt spiritual blindness. And trust this, even if they never confess it, they perceived it. Your knowing is not ordinary. Your silence is not vacant. Your energy is not random. It is assignment. And the manner in which you spiritually intercepted, exposed, and inverted every test without strain constitutes divine strategy. That is what being chosen genuinely resembles. They requested a sign. You were the sign, and they will never forget it. This message strikes something profound within your spirit. Allow it to reverberate. This space belongs to the chosen, to the spiritually awake, to those who advance in silence yet walk with fire. You are not alone, and we are merely commencing.